that they're posing too much of a threat. Well, joining me now live on LBC News, James Marlow, foreign and defence analyst. Thanks for your time this afternoon, James. So what's the latest that you're hearing on the ground?
Yeah, good afternoon to you, Rachel. Nice to be with you this afternoon. Well, I can tell you that from Israel's point of view, Hamas have rejected the sixth offer. This is the sixth offer on the table. This is the one the Americans, the Egyptians, the Qataris and other Arab states told Hamas in Gaza, look, take the deal. It's a really good deal. The Israelis just over a week ago actually even compromised on what they wanted. So initially that they were asking for 40 of the 132 now hostages remaining in Gaza, 40. The Hamas said they couldn't go with that. They would go for 20. In the end, the Israelis said that they would want 33. And in response, they would give 6 weeks of quiet and they would release several thousand Palestinians from Israeli jails, of course, convicted of murder or attempted murder, or those driving the bomber to the actual scene. And as I said, the Arabs said this is a good deal. Now, what I understand is that Hamas have rejected it. And the reason is, and you're partly right by saying that Netanyahu has actually said no, and that is because that Hamas are still sticking to their original objectives, which is that in order for this deal to go through, and I think that many other people have said this as well, in order for this deal to go through, that the Israelis, the IDF, have to completely withdraw from Gaza and that Hamas have to continue to stay in power. Now, there are several reasons why this can't be. And by the way, this is not just Netanyahu's government, which is, of course, backed up by two religious parties and two right-wing parties. Netanyahu heads the Likud party, which is known as the centre to right party. There are a couple of reasons why that this won't happen. And number one is that once you leave Hamas in power, that means, as they've said several times before, that they will come back and do October the 7th, a second time and a third time, etc. But the second thing is, as well, is that they will claim victory. They will claim victory that they actually won the war against Israel after 7 months. And this will give huge encouragement to all the Shiite groups across the Middle East, backed by Iran, inside of Syria, inside of Lebanon, inside of Iraq and Yemen and others, of course, including the Iranians itself. And that's the reason why that Israel can't go with this. The other reason as well is that it could be that Hamas might draw this out for another 6 months or even much longer. There actually are 4 Israelis who've been held in Gaza for the last 10 years. 2 of them, by the way, are Arabs. And Hamas have just drawn this out for so long. So the Israelis fear this. And that's the reason why it's a no-go. And I can't really see, and I've said this several times on LBC News, I can't really see there being a deal unless Hamas agree to the 6 weeks, they take their prisoners, and then they resume the fighting after 6 weeks or 2 months or maybe 2.5 months.
But as you say, Hamas seeming very entrenched in that position. So where do we go from here?
Well, the Saudi Al-Sharq outlet reported this morning that Hamas says in principle that they agree to this, but they want clarifications of the causes. Now, I've seen these reports so many times before, and what I think that means is, from my analysis and my assessment and reading between the lines, is that they don't want to shut down the line because they're under pressure from Qatar, from America, from the Egyptians. I mean, many of the moderate Arab states in the Gulf are putting the pressure on Hamas in Gaza to say, take this deal. There can't be another way out. And Hamas is saying, well, we can't take this deal because we want to win the war against Israel and we want to relaunch it again when we're ready, when we've rebuilt up and we've rearmed and we've regrouped and we're ready to take on Israel once again. So we can't actually give in to what they want. In other words, the IDF have to completely withdraw, as I said, from Gaza. So I just think this is going to be a stalemate. And I think what you're going to see next is the patience of the Israeli government and a loss of the Israeli people, by the way. Just again, this morning, there was another demonstration outside the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, again, from bereaved families who are urging the government not to halt the war. Now, you reported earlier on Saturday nights, of course, there are many demonstrations that are opposing the Israeli government and they want to deal at any cost. These are, many of them, consist of of the anti-government demonstrations which we saw before October the 7th. They are starting to build up, but I can tell you that I have this on very good authority that it's a maximum of 8 of the families who have hostages inside of Gaza are participating in those. The vast majority of them are not, because they consider it to be wrong to be demonstrating against the government during wartime. So there's a complete split again within Israeli society, but you're not hearing from the group that are actually for the government and behind the government and saying, get on with this, get into Rafah, destroy the 4 remaining Hamas battalions and see what hostages that you can rescue, which are believed to be inside of Rafah itself.
Of course, the kind of offensive on Rafah also being highly controversial as well because of the humanitarian cost of it.
Well, what will happen in that case is that Israel has said, and again, this is the Israeli spokespeople, and it comes from the Prime Minister's office, they have proved they've got a track record of actually getting out civilians. So they did that in Gaza City, they did that in the north, they did that in the center, they sent the civilians down to the south. Now what you've got is a lot of civilians down in the south. So they will find a corridor, and this is what the Americans were very concerned about. But the Americans have since, including, by the way, President Biden, has since actually received a couple of delegations from Israel to find out exactly what the plan is on the table from the Israeli point of view to go into Rafah and to prevent as many civilian casualties as possible. So the Americans have seen that plan. I know that the Egyptians have also seen that plan because Egypt, I can tell you that an IDF delegation went off to speak to the Egyptian military about a week ago, maybe just over a week ago now. They sat down at the table in Cairo, and the Egyptians were very concerned that if there is an incursion into Rafah, that'll push, because Rafah is in the south of Gaza, that'll push Palestinian civilians into Egypt. And the Egyptians definitely don't want that. They don't want to have any Palestinians inside of northern Sinai, which of course is part of Egypt. So the IDF were explaining the plan on the table, which is to move out the civilians towards the northeast, towards the northwest, and also towards the west itself, and guaranteeing the Egyptians that there won't be an overflow into Egyptian territory in order to keep good relations with Egypt. So it's complicated, but there's a huge amount which is going on behind the scenes, which is not necessarily being reported in all the news outlets.
Indeed, I appreciate you bringing us up to date, James. Just quickly, we have been hearing from the Israeli Prime Minister saying that his cabinet's voted to shut down the Israeli offices of Al Jazeera. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, last week the Attorney General in Israel gave the go-ahead for a cabinet vote to take place, which I think was Tuesday or Wednesday. This decision has widespread support throughout the Knesset. The government announced it will shut down Al Jazeera on the basis of a law, a recent law, which was passed in the Knesset, that says that if a foreign media outlet or its activity is deemed to be harmful to state security, it can be shut down. Now, Al Jazeera, for several years, have actually focused very much on a lot of the anti-Israel words. I mean, they continually, I've seen it a few times myself. Actually, believe it or not, I used to be their official Israeli political analyst in 2006 and 2007, based in the Knesset and talking about the proportional representation system and covering general elections for them, and also the different political parties and the candidates and how the system worked. But in 2008, Qatar came in, put in a huge amount of money, and I lost my job, and many others were not given a telephone call back for that reason. But they focused very much on the buzzwords: Israel's apartheid, colonial occupation, killing Palestinian children. It's even shown clips of Syria and Syrian people under rubble and substituted it for what's going on in Gaza. So it also claimed, by the way, that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket that was seen launching about 6 weeks after the war had started from an Islamic Jihad position inside of Gaza, it actually dropped. The Al Jazeera network claimed that it hit the hospital, 500 people dead. It stuck with that story. It turned out, of course, that it hit the car park, which about 20 to 30 civilians were killed. They were definitely civilians, and they were covering up in the car park. But it wasn't anything to do with Israel. The Al Jazeera network said that they had verified it definitely was, even though they had their cameras watching it. So for all of these reasons, the Israelis have just said, this is simply, we believe in a different point of view. We believe in progressive, liberal, open media. In fact, you have many media outlets in Israel, Israeli newspapers and websites and television networks, by the way, they're very, very anti the government, very anti-Bibi Netanyahu, even though he won the election just under 2 years ago. They're very anti him, but that's tolerated. But Al Jazeera, they feel, have gone a step further. Now, I've just been told that Al Jazeera are furious with this decision. They expected it, and they will actually put in not a claim. They will oppose this through the courts, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I can just finally tell you that this order for closure, which was signed by the communications minister, is in effect for 45 days, but it's likely to be renewed onwards from whenever 45 days expires.
So that breaking news then. Thank you very much, James Marlow, foreign and defence analyst. Thanks for your thoughts this afternoon on LBC News. Of course, we're going to bring you the latest as we continue to get it from the conflict in the Middle East throughout the day. And